On the 4th of November 1995, Yitzhak Rabin, the fourth Prime Minister of Israel, was walking off from a stage after celebrating the success of the Oslo Peace Accords. The signing was meant to bring peace with the Palestinians. 100,000 Israelis had turned up. As Rabin left the stage and into the crowd, a man in a blue t-shirt followed. Within minutes, he pulled out a gun and shot Rabin 3 times in the back. Rabin was murdered in cold blood on the streets of Tel Aviv at 9:30 p.m. that night.
I am very sad and very shocked.
That night, outside the hospital, people were chanting, "Bibi is a murderer." By Bibi, they were referring to Benjamin Netanyahu.
The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has applied for arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
The United Nations is warning that humanitarian operations inside Gaza are nearing collapse.
Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine.
This morning, you've been accused of using starvation as a weapon of war.
Well, I think this is absurd. This is beyond outrageous.
This is the story of Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel and the war in Gaza. 1 month before the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, Netanyahu led right-wing protests against the Oslo peace process. That night, Netanyahu addressed a large crowd in Jerusalem Zion Square from a balcony. The rally was marked by extreme rhetoric and incitement, with some protesters carrying signs depicting Rabin in Nazi SS uniform and others showing him dressed in a keffiyeh. Many have blamed Netanyahu for the murder. At the time, Netanyahu was running for elections representing Likud, a right-wing party which was founded on principles of security, strong opposition to withdrawal from the occupied territories, and a founding notion of support for the expansion of settlements. During the final months of 1995, polls showed he looked extremely unlikely to win the elections, which would be held the following year. In February of 1996, as the elections approached, the number 18 bus was winding down Jaffa Road in Jerusalem. On it, a Palestinian suicide bomber blew himself up, killing 17 civilians and 9 Israeli soldiers. Hamas took responsibility for the bombing, citing revenge for the killing of Yahya Ayash, a Hamas operative and bomb maker. In March, another Palestinian suicide bomber detonated an explosive belt, killing himself, 16 civilians and 3 Israeli soldiers. Over the 9 days from the end of February and early March, a total of 4 suicide bombings took place, killing 78 people in Israel. Before these bombings, polls showed Netanyahu was behind Shimon Peres in the elections by 30 points, and many polls at the time showed that up to 60% of Israelis were for peace and in support of the Oslo Accords. But in the aftermath of the bombings in Jerusalem, Israelis started to lose faith in peace with the Palestinians, and support for the Oslo Accords started to plummet. As the elections approached, polls still showed Peres in the lead to win. Many went to bed on the night of the elections expecting to wake up to Peres as the winner, but what they found was that Netanyahu had won by a narrow 1%. Benjamin Netanyahu was born on October 21st, 1949 in Tel Aviv to Benzion Netanyahu, a notable historian and staunch supporter of the revisionist Zionist movement. Benzion's life and ideologies were profoundly shaped by his relationship with Ze'ev Jabotinsky, the founder of revisionist Zionism, an ideological stream that advocates for a bold and assertive approach to establishing a Jewish state. Jabotinsky's ideas deeply influenced Benzion's views on the Arab-Jewish conflict in Palestine. Jabotinsky believed that peace could only be achieved after the Arabs recognized the inevitability of the Jewish state, which required a display of Jewish strength and resolve. At home, Benzion was a towering figure whose days of Jabotinsky filled family conversations. For young Benjamin and his siblings, these discussions were not mere stories but lessons on survival, identity, and the politics of strength. Benzion's recounting of Jabotinsky's principles and the debates on Zionist strategy were regular features at the dinner table, instilling a robust ideological foundation in his children. His life and teachings at home were consistent with the belief that a strong Israel was the only Israel that could survive and thrive in a hostile region. These principles, passed from Jabotinsky to Benzion and then to Benjamin, have continued to influence the discourse on Israeli national security and its approach to peace in the Middle East for decades. On the one hand, you have those who want peace, mostly on the left, versus those who focus on security for a heavy-handed approach to the Palestinians, mostly on the right. This has been the great divide, which has been the cornerstone of Israeli politics. A few years earlier, on February 25, 1994, a man named Barak Goldstein, dressed in IDF uniform, entered the Cave of the Patriarchs, also known as the Ibrahimi Mosque, carrying an assault rifle. this place is extremely sacred to both Jews and Muslims. As Barak entered, he saw a room packed with Muslim worshippers as it was the holy month of Ramadan.
A settler opened fire with an automatic rifle in a crowded mosque in the West Bank town of Hebron. At least 40 Palestinians were killed, scores more wounded.
He started firing indiscriminately.
Palestinian fury as the victims of the mosque massacre are rushed to hospital in Hebron.
This would later be known as the Cave of the Patriarchs Ibrahimi Mosque Massacre, and would heighten tensions between Palestinians and Israeli settlers even more than before.
Massacre threatens to claim another casualty. Peace talks between Israel and the PLO.
As part of the Oslo Peace Accords in 1997, Netanyahu was under immense pressure to honour the agreement signed by his predecessor and allow the PLO to take control over the majority of the West Bank.
Again, I think the problem is the more I comment, the more I undermine the chances of success. We had a very specific, frank, candid, and long talk. And now we're going to talk to the Palestinians and see whether it's something we can do.
President Clinton at the time was focused on pushing a deal which would later be called the Hebron Agreement. Netanyahu ended up making a pragmatic decision to push forward with the Oslo Agreement and the Hebron Protocol.
We are in Jerusalem with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. It is a crucial time for him as he is engaged in negotiation with the Palestinians about the future of Hebron.
Because Hebron was put as a litmus test, and my willingness to make peace, and it was built up and vested with so much political import and symbolism.
A test of your commitment to the peace process and Oslo.
That's right. And all of a sudden, I'm passing the test.
This pragmatic decision and other compromises during his first term as Prime Minister would lead to Netanyahu alienating his support base and losing the election to Ehud Barak in 1999. Netanyahu both compromised and progressed the Oslo Accords, alienating both his right-wing coalition as well as those who wanted progress towards peace.
Suppose we followed this suggestion. Suppose we just walked out, which is what they would like. They'd like us to get out so they can get in to continue, as Arafat refuses to continue a war of extermination against us.
From his first time in power and his defeat in 1999, Netanyahu learned a crucial lesson. Attempts to balance the demands of his right-wing coalition partners with international pressure for compromise proved unattainable and ultimately contributed to his electoral defeat. This experience shaped his subsequent leadership approach, where he emphasized a strong security stance as a cornerstone of his political strategy. A few years later, these lessons would come head-to-head with the President of the United States, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now Joe Biden. As the sun began to rise on August 18, 2005, over the largest settlement in Gaza, Nevi Dakalim, the atmosphere was tense and charged with raw emotion. Around 1,500 settlers had barricaded themselves inside the synagogue, clinging to the last vestige of a place they called home for years. They prayed fervently, tears streaming down their faces. Over the past few days, thousands of their fellow settlers, nearly 8,000 in total, from 21 settlements in Gaza, had been forcibly removed as part of Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's disengagement plan.
And then there are a few who have been screaming from the windows of the buses as they drive away. But right now it seems that the fight really has got out of them.
This plan, designed to enhance security and reduce friction, felt like a dagger to their hearts. The settlers resisted with every ounce of strength, kicking and screaming as they were dragged out, the sacred space echoing of their pleas and protests. On the rooftops nearby, Palestinians cheered, witnessing what they saw as the end of an occupation and the beginning of a new chapter. This new chapter was marked by the Gaza Disengagement Plan, a unilateral decision by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon aimed at enhancing Israeli security and reducing friction between Israelis and Palestinians. The plan involved the complete withdrawal of nearly 8,000 settlers from 21 settlements in Gaza, dismantling the Israeli military presence and transferring control of the territory to the Palestinians. For many Palestinians, this moment symbolized the promise of self-governance and the hope for a future free from Israeli control. The days before Gaza disengagement plan was set to be executed, Benjamin Netanyahu stood at a crossroads. As finance minister in Ariel Sharon's government, he had long been a stalwart of the Likud party and a vocal advocate for a strong, secure Israel. But the disengagement plan clashed sharply with his vision. On August 7, 2005, Netanyahu made a dramatic and defining choice. He resigned from his position as finance minister.
I cannot be a partner to a move that I think compromises the security of Israel, tears the people apart, and enshrines the principle of withdrawal to the indefensible 67 lines. And I think in the future we'll also risk the unity of Jerusalem.
He argued passionately that withdrawing from Gaza would be perceived as a sign of weakness by Israelis' enemies, potentially emboldening terrorist groups and leading to more violence. As the dust settled from the Israeli disengagement in August 2005, Gaza now stood at a crossroads. The withdrawal left a power vacuum, and the Palestinian Authority initially stepped in, but the sense of unease was palpable. The promise of self-governance brought hope, but also uncertainty about who would fill the leadership void. In the early morning of January 25, 2006, Gazans woke up to the day that would alter the course of their history. This was the day of the Palestinian legislative elections, a landmark event that saw a fierce contest between the ruling Fatah party and its Islamist rival Hamas. The streets buzzed with anticipation, with posters and banners fluttering in the breeze, and citizens lined up at polling stations, their faces etched with determination and hope. Hamas, known for its extensive network of social services, had garnered significant support among the impoverished population of Gaza. The disengagement had left many feeling abandoned and betrayed by Fatah, which was seen as corrupt and ineffective. Hamas's message of resistance against Israel occupation and its promise of a clean government resonated deeply with the electorate. As the votes were counted and the results began to trickle in, it became clear that a seismic shift was underway.
In January, election observers from the Carter Center witnessed an historic moment for democracy in the Middle East. The Islamic Hamas Party winning a majority of seats in the Palestinian Legislative Council.
It was a moment of triumph for Hamas, but also a harbinger of the turmoil that was to follow. For Gazans, this shift offered a new hope, a chance to address grievances that had long been ignored. However, the international community reacted with alarm. The United States, the European Union, and Israel declared Hamas a terrorist organization.
To President Abbas and the Palestinian people on an election process that was peaceful and free of violence, and by all accounts fair, and where there was very heavy turnout of the Palestinian population. The Palestinian people have apparently voted for change. As we have said, you cannot have one foot in politics and the other in terror. Our position on Hamas has therefore not changed.
And cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority, demanding that Hamas renounce violence, recognize Israel, and accept previous agreements. Hamas refused, and the economic and diplomatic isolation deepened. The fragile unity between Fatah and Hamas quickly disintegrated. Tensions boiled over into violent clashes in June 2007, culminating in Hamas forcibly taking control of Gaza.
With gunfire, a takeover of Gaza by Hamas may be near.
By the end of the conflict, Hamas had established itself as the sole governing authority in Gaza, while Fatah retained control of the West Bank. Life in Gaza under Hamas rule became increasingly dire. The Israeli-Egyptian blockade, imposed to contain Hamas, strangled the economy and left the population grappling with shortages of basic necessities. Unemployment soared and the infrastructure crumbled. Despite these hardships, Hamas maintained its grip on power, bolstered by its network of social services and its stance against Israel.
On the ground in one of the world's most densely populated areas, it's a gruesome scene.
But as they desperately searched through the rubble, it became clear that many were dead here.
18,000 homes in Gaza were destroyed during the summer 2014 war.
Israel has struck a displacement camp where civilians were sheltering, killing at least 45 people in Rafah in southern Gaza.
So I went out to make this video because I was really optimistic that if we could focus on understanding Netanyahu and his right-wing politics and his attitude to Gaza, we could find out and start to understand that probably the big problem here is Netanyahu himself. The more I went down the rabbit hole and researched and got really deep into Israeli politics, the more pessimistic I became. It seems to me that the elite in Israeli politics are actually backing Netanyahu. They want the same solution. And since October 7th, I don't think the people, it seems very unrealistic that the people of Israel would ever vote for a two-state solution, which is one of 4 solutions that John Mersheimer talks about.
And my basic argument is that Israel is the big loser. Israel is in really serious trouble today, and there's little hope of getting away from that moving forward.
John Mersheimer, a massively respected political scientist, someone who I've been reading since the days of my master's and in university, he goes into 4 solutions to the problem.
And there are basically 4 options. One is you have a democratic Greater Israel. That's not going to happen because it would no longer be a Jewish state.
Because there's roughly 50% between the Arabs and the Jews, and the Arabs are having a lot more babies. The demographics do not work in favor of the Jews, and the Jews obviously want a Jewish state. The second solution is a 2-state solution.
Everybody loves to talk about a 2-state solution. That is not happening, certainly after what happened on October 7th, but even before then, and I'll talk more about this. Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli elite has no interest in a 2-state solution.
The third solution is apartheid, which is the system they currently live in.
Basically, what you now have is an apartheid state. We can go into this in detail in the Q&A if you want to do that, but if you look at Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem, which is the leading human rights group in Israel, all 3 of those organizations have produced lengthy reports that lay out why Israel is an apartheid state.
The fourth solution is ethnic cleansing, which Marshall is arguing is what they're looking to do now, because ethnic cleansing is a great solution from a strategic point of view if you're Israel, because it gets rid of the apartheid problem.
The 4th option is ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing means getting rid of the Palestinians, for the most part, who live in Gaza and who live in the West Bank, and creating a Greater Israel that is completely dominated by Israeli Jews and has very few, if any, Palestinians in its midst.
They're currently living in an apartheid state, and they don't want to live in an apartheid state, but they can't become democratic, and they can't include all the Palestinians. So the solution is ethnic cleansing. Once they ethnically cleanse the region, then they can have a majority Jewish state still. And Marshall argues this is exactly what's happening in Gaza. They're destroying all the hospitals, infrastructure, water, everything to try to get rid of the Palestinians. But this is failing as well.
Democratic Greater Israel. Number 2, 2-state solution. Those 2 are off the table. Number 3, apartheid, which is basically what you have now. And number 4 is ethnic cleansing, where you get rid of the Palestinians.
It's clear they're not going to be able to ethnically cleanse the region. They're not going to be able to have a 2-state solution. They're not going to have a democratic system for equal rights for everyone in Greater Israel. So they're just stuck in apartheid.
Is that Netanyahu was actually very happy with the fact that Hamas was running Gaza. This is hard to believe today, but it is true. And he was making sure that Hamas was being funded and that Hamas was doing reasonably well. Now, why is that the case? Because Netanyahu is adamantly opposed to a 2-state solution, and Mahmoud Abbas, who runs the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, is in favor of a 2-state solution. Abbas is a threat because Abbas wants a 2-state solution.